This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.
And welcome back, everybody. So our country celebrating its 250th birthday very soon. And with that, lots of history. I want to look at your family and focus on today, historical family stories. Does your family have a story? I'll bet there's one there that connects to history in some regard. This is so much in her wheelhouse as a professional storyteller and author, but she's also got this affinity and focus when it comes to history, facts and figures, our professional of the year. Back with us. Always love having you here. Carolyn Marshall Stearns back with us. How is everything in your world today?
Everything's good. It's been a good week.
When I think of the history and the family history, did I ever tell you my Lindbergh connection?
I think you mentioned it, but more of your story of the Taylor grandfather.
Oh, well, yes. I don't know how historic that is, but he, as I learned through what's that called? Genealogy. Somebody just said, hey, let me just trace your roots. I had very little information and found out that my grandfather was a tailor in Lithuania. Didn't even know I was Lithuanian. And he worked his butt off and came to the U.S. and did his thing. It was apparently very successful. But my mom's dad was connected to the Lindbergh flight of 1927 or somewhere around there, out of Mitchell Field on Long Island. And if you ever see those historical pictures and there's a guy standing there with a paper under his arm, that's my grandfather.
Isn't that neat?
And that was his thing. Like, he always walked around with a newspaper under his arm, and he was in the police department. And I don't know if he wasn't the chief, but he was, up there in rank. And he was there to help out with that inaugural flight. Spirit of St. Louis, I believe the plane was called. So every time I look at those pictures, I'm like, and I never got to meet him, but like, oh, there he is. There he is again. There's another angle of him. It's cool, when you connect it to history. And I'm sure we all have those kind of connections, right?
We sure do. And they get forgotten. They can be dug up and the pieces assembled to retell the story and take those ancestors, even a generation ago, that aren't here to tell the story anymore. A lot of it can be pieced together and they become not a name and a date on a headstone or in a genealogy program, but a story that lets you have a little insight into who they really were.
And you've even shared some historical accounts in Connecticut where you are, and inspiration for some of your books too, right?
Right. And there's just so much. And our family trees are tremendous. We got two sides and it just goes back and back. And some people don't have the luxury currently of knowing who those people were. But the more DNA research that's done, the more matches that can be made, trees will be able to be assembled for those who don't have information. And sometimes one little clue opens an entire trail of stories for you to follow up on.
And it doesn't have to be, like my Lindbergh connection, whatever. There can be little nuggets of history within your family. Your family could have owned a hardware store in town back in the 1930s. And maybe, once you trace back the story, maybe an aerospace company needed some screws and you provided them. And that was, part of went to the planes in the war, whatever it might be. But when you start tracing those little nuggets, it excites me. I find it fascinating.
Immigration stories are fascinating. What they sacrificed. Ellis Island has fabulous records for researching. Some people arrived in this country with less than $2 and a big dream. And that takes incredible courage and bravery to get on that ship to the unknown.
Funny you should say that. And that's how my mind works. You say something, you massage it and something comes out. So the grandfather I referred to, His wife, obviously my grandmother, came off the boat as a teenager from Ireland by herself. And life began, started a family. And I give people like that, like courage. Like, oh my gosh, like how did you do that? It's pretty remarkable when you think back to, a lot of the things that our family went through or families went through.
Right, right. And I find those stories the most important threads. We all know the handful, the cluster of American heroes, but the everyday heroes that made sure that things got done, that carried your family forward, that struggled through the Depression, that went to Vietnam, that were in World War One or two, all of these things. It took those whole masses of people, and not only were those, say, soldiers suffering and struggling, their family at home was missing an integral part in income and support system. And so all of that becomes stories of the American way. And all those threads are like a tapestry. Threads alone make not, are nothing. Threads put together weave a picture of 250 years of America and what we are and who we are.
So you mentioned before records at Ellis Island. Can you share some thoughts if somebody wants to trace back their family? They have an inkling that maybe their family, whatever it might be. Where can they look? What are some of the different resources?
So there's several genealogy websites. Great place to start. If you have a name and birth date, maybe a death year or a place, some connection. There's Find a Grave. It can help you find that headstone, which often has pertinent information on it. Especially at wartime, they might mention, they were died at the Battle of the Bulge, or, some do, some don't. Military records are available online, old newspapers. Your local library will have access to ancestry sites and so forth. Many have memberships so people can do their research at the library. They also have papers that are local on microfilm, so you can go and research that. The Library of Congress has an amazing collection. Now, when I was researching a particular story, I had a few names of the key players in it, but what I found from 1776 was their pay stubs.
Ooh, that's cool. Oh,
They're in a
wow.
museum in Philadelphia. They've been saved, all these pay stubs, so you could see what the going rate was for a blacksmith in a shipyard and a master craftsman and the natives who rigged the ships because they weren't afraid to shinny up those masts and set the pulleys and ropes in place. And finding those pay stubs just blew my mind. We throw away pay stubs, shredder, gone. They're all still there. They tell so many stories.
I find that super cool. I really do. Even if you looked at a grocery receipt or what they were eating at that time, fascinating, like completely fascinating. And by the way, in doing searches, the New York Times, valuable resource. They have a lot of stuff online, and many times it's a picture of the article, but you can find stuff. I found stuff that connected to me from 43 years ago. New York Times. Well, I was like, oh, wow, they had that in there. Oh, interesting.
Yep. So much stuff and more coming every day. So today you hit a brick wall and you can't figure out the next step of that ancestor. But every day, new documents are being scanned in, and the mass of information bites is growing. So just because today's a brick wall doesn't mean you won't solve the puzzle or tell the story. You'll be able to go back later or come at it from a different direction to find it. I do a workshop on this. I have a 90-minute version that kind of introduces finding your family stories, and then I have a 3 hour where we dig in and start figuring out how and where to go to craft them. And I've been booking that lately, along with my America 250 performance that has a whole mass of stories from different eras. Because I know one museum wants just Rev War, but another one wants a timeline, and I'll work my way through some stories of history of America. People are hungry for these.
How do you do the workshop? Like, you have a bunch of people around, and what are some of the things that you discuss? How do you direct them?
We start with whatever tidbit, if they have someone or something they're interested in. But before I even go there, I give a sample of a bit of a story, talk about how I found the things in the story. We try out voices, we try out, because we can relate that story across the kitchen table in a conversational voice such as this, but it has so much more bearing if your grandfather shouted down the mine shaft, "Cave in!" And adding that voice is so important because that all of a sudden pumps the adrenaline, gets the listeners engaged, and we really want the younger generation to know these stories, to know the foundation of America and the foundation of their family.
Mm, I totally agree. And my son, who will be 20 tomorrow, um, when he talks about some of that stuff from family lineage, it's nice. Like, I'm like, well, all right, it's on your radar. Yes, he's into video games and all of that too, but it resonates. It resonates. There's an interest in it.
So I did a search for someone who had been moved out of the country as a child and lost contact, but had some sketchy memories of some certain relatives. And, like names, and we knew what city because we knew where he'd moved from. And I was able to dig it all up, pictures of the houses, Google Street View, house was still there. Census, the US Census is a
Ah,
fabulous, fabulous resource. And oh, yeah, look who was living with them at the time. Or that here's a different story, two people, and there's another child, another wife or girlfriend. Well, look who lives 2 blocks over. And the census shows it, and you're going, yeah, that's just like walk around the corner. We know how that happened.
wow. Wow. I totally
There are,
forgot about the census. Yeah.
yeah, the census are fabulous, and that they take that look in leaps. So
Mm.
here they are struggling, and they've got 3 kids. And 10 years later, oh my gosh, they got 6 kids. And they're living in a much higher neighborhood, and look at the job they got. So uh, indenture papers, a lot of people came over for on an indenture. Somebody put up the money to get them here. They got to work it off.
Mm.
And that was the way so many people came across owing somebody already.
Even the manifest from ships. There's a lot going on there.
A lot of the ship's logs have been scanned in, and that's fascinating. A lot of company records are getting scanned in, which is interesting. Especially the big mills, the big steel plants. Some of those things, they're starting to amass some of that record so it's not lost and digitizing them.
Mm. Um, I've gone to ship museums and even upstate New York. Was it last year? There's in a river in Albany. There's a battleship there, and just happened to be up in that area. So I was like, all right, let me check this out. This be cool. Um, all of the original records are in the engine room, and they're sitting right there. You can look down and actually see the real deal of many years ago, where the ship sailed, and who was piloting, and things that had happened. It's fascinating. I find it fascinating, even more so when you see the actual handwriting.
Right. When I was researching our farm's history for its 250th anniversary,
Mm,
I was in the town hall vault, and I was trying to amass because the farm started out a 200-acre farm and then it grew. And when was that growth? Well, it was actually over the continuum. Pieces were acquired, all surrounding fields and farms. So we kept going back and pulling out the books and looking at, they're huge ledgers, and we're pulling out and paging very gently through this heavy paper there until I was holding the page from 1772 when the 10th great grandfather signed the deed and bought that farm. And that's his signature on the paper. And it's still in town and right here. You can touch it in the book. You know, I put my hand very gently on the page, and I'm like, my hand's resting where he held the page steady to sign it. And it just moves you. It absolutely moves you. Now, farms tend to label places.
How do you mean?
So if you're going to give directions in New York, you give it by this street and that street. But on farms, there's a gazillion different fields and lanes and lots. And so in order to reference and tell your helpers, hey, I'll be haying today in the Spencer lot, bring me a wagon around noon. So that's how it got named. It was the Spencer lot. It's always been the Spencer lot. Well, when I figured it out, yeah, because they bought it from the Spencers in 1840 something, and the name stuck. There's history there. Wouldn't the Spencers be surprised to know that they're remembered in that piece of land and that it hasn't changed? It's hay on one side of the lane and corn on the other, and we've kept it going all the years since we bought it from them. So
Wow.
there's a bunch of those lots that those names we go by. And now my father-in-law called a piece right near the farm the Abigail lot. Well, I figured that one out. That was his or his previous generation's accent corrupting the name. The lot was bought from Ms. Abigail Barrows, daughter of the minister. She had inherited her father's place and sold that piece off to the farm. It's Abigail's lot.
And what do they call it?
Abigail.
Abigail.
So, yeah. And it may be more of an Old English vernacular that was passed on. The way they said her name back then, don't know.
And that's the other thing, too. A lot of families shorten their names or change their names for whatever the reason may be. So I guess you need to look into that, too, when you're looking, if you're not aware.
And spelling. There's variations on spelling of many names because people didn't have the levels of education or maybe the continuity. And maybe that child was orphaned, but he knew his name was Barnes and he didn't know there was an E after the N. And so he shortened it to Barnes with just an S. And because that's what he learned to Barn. And then there were 3 Barnes. Oh, I'm a Barnes. Okay, that's how you spell it. And they went on. So it makes finding those things, you need to find another avenue to verify it's the same family. But it's interesting because the spelling changes, there's like 3 or 4 variations on the Stearns last name.
Now, you mentioned before Find a Grave. Is that a website like findagrave.com?
Yep, it sure is. And people, volunteers, go in and photograph headstones and post them, what cemetery it is, and here's the headstone. And they're not all there. They're trying to get some of the earliest graves before the stones deteriorate. So it's really nice to be able to look it up because maybe your ancestors had someone that went west and you don't have the time or the economic situation to travel to Montana to look for that information, which would have had to have been done 40 years ago. And now you just pop on Find a Grave. Oh, look, there's that brother. He died in this year. The information's there.
I have no words. That is just amazing. That people take the time to photograph. And even so, let's say you want to visit a relative. Let's say you haven't seen their grave in many years and maybe just came up in conversation. And a lot of times when you go, the main office isn't open and you don't know where the grave is. And maybe it was, 30 years ago and you have an idea it's around here somewhere. What a great tool.
It is a huge resource. And yeah, it's open on the weekend. So you can get a better clue as to what aisle it's in and so forth. They'll give some sort of direction. And not all cemeteries are well labeled. It's just a town by town, cemetery by cemetery thing.
And that's another thought too, that you might not be able to, it might not be clear. Wow. Any other resources that, for anything that might pop in your head?
Military records, harbor master records, but I would really just go to your library and start there or get online and start Googling, putting in different way, asking it different ways. If you can find a middle initial, that helps, especially if you have one of the really common names, Smith, Jones, then you're going to be up against a challenge that there could be a gazillion David Smiths. And so you need to dig back. The naming fathers and sons, watch the dates. Even in the colonial era, the first girl was usually named after the mother. So you've got multiple Mary Smith. You got to watch your numbers and line them right. And remember, they often married quite young.
Right.
So, yeah, and church records. Churches are great if you know the town they're in and you happen to know the religion that's generally been practiced in your family, because church records record the baptisms and births and the deaths and the weddings, and all those records are in church archives.
This doesn't get old for you ever, does it?
No, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and I
Right.
just want to see the picture and hear the story.
Even that story about my grandfather or great grandfather as a tailor, I didn't have information. I wasn't close on my father's side for his family, like nothing. And that genealogist was able to pull that out using, I'm sure, some of these resources.
Yeah,
Wild.
for certain. And the newspapers just tell all kinds of different things, maybe a robbery there. Well, then you can look at who robbed the store, what were the circumstances, what was the economy at that time, what was happening in the news at the time of that ancestor. And remember, it can be somebody as close as your grandparents. My grandparents had really interesting lives. It's not that long ago. It's still our history, and it gets older every year. So knowing that my grandmother at 13 was shipped out from Nova Scotia to Manchester, New Hampshire as a mill worker and never went home again. What a story she had of hard, hard work life. And so many young women were sent to work the mills and kept in boarding houses, and their paycheck went home to mom and dad. They got nothing out of it, few
Wow.
cents. They were fed and clothed and worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. That's a story our children need to hear. It's not old history. It's not revolution. I remember
It's your
spending
history.
with that grandmother.
It's your history.
Right.
Wow. You said robbery, brought back a memory. I saw an account of my uncle, that would be my father's brother, involved in a robbery way back, many decades ago. And it was a case of mistaken identity. He didn't do it. He wasn't doing it, like an upstanding citizen. And there was, it was a newspaper article that they cleared him and everything, but some tense moments there. But it's all there. It's in a newspaper.
What a great story that makes.
I got to look back because I saved it, did some screenshots. I got to go back for the deeper details on it. Yeah, but could you imagine? They think you're a bank robber. It's like, no, I wasn't even near the bank. I would never do that. Hello, what are you talking about? Wow. This is just a piece of what you do in terms of working with people, history, stories, author. Can you direct somebody, maybe in a consultation basis, if somebody's trying to find information about something and or their family?
Sure can. They can also have their library or historical society book me, and we can work on it as a workshop. I've done that at many conferences and storytelling festivals, but also at Boston Public Library. And I had like 40 or 50 people in the room. It was awesome. And they were all ages.
It's so much fun.
Yeah.
Like, it really is. And you're right. It's like getting another piece to the puzzle. You're trying to put it all together. And there's such benefit in that too, either for you or for others, or even just the story that you tell. What's your website again, Carolyn?
Carolyn Stearns, Storyteller.com.
Beautiful. Thank you for today. Learned a lot. What resources? Find a grave. I'm going to be plugging in my relatives just to see if they show up. It's cool. And we'll catch up next time, okay?
This is the Global Podcast Network, where executives and professionals connect, share, and inspire. Stay tuned for the conversations that drive success.